Another thing we need to look at as a congregation, especially as new people begin to come in, is how often do we use the word I? I is a word which, in the seminar that Brother House did, he pretty much covered this, so I'm not going to cover the whole thing all over again. But we need to be conscious of how we perceive ourselves. As an I, or do we perceive ourselves as we? If we were to take account of how many times during the day that we use the word I, we might be surprised how self-centered we become. And when we say we, a lot of times we've become to mean that we as a congregation, because as a congregation we have a history. We're speaking a language that newcomers don't necessarily share. We can sit around and tell stories half of the night of things that have happened in years past. And so we have an identity that the new people are going to have a harder time assimilating into unless the we that we're talking about also includes them. Now, the only reason someone would join a group is because everyone needs to belong. That's a basic human need. We all want to belong. Even these mountain men that went out and spent years in the wilderness, they ended up marrying Indian wives and raising children because human beings need to belong. They need a group. And so people, when they come in, they're here because they need to belong. Than other groups that they've tried. So as a group, when we say we need to find ways of including the newcomers, or the person who's only been here a year, who doesn't share our history, or maybe the person that's only been here a month and doesn't share our history and our funny stories. We need to include them. And a lot of times as new people come in, their lives aren't completely in order with Torah. We have to show a lot of grace because some of them might still be working on Shabbat. We can't make them feel like sinners or they won't come back. You know, they might have a lot of issues in their lives, and this is where I think it's okay to talk about past failures. Because if you've gone through a period where it took you a while to extricate yourself from a job where you had to work on Shabbat, but you made it through that, and now you have a gift where you are free every Shabbat to observe and to worship and to remember, then that is a testimony. In that case, failure, if it will encourage them along the way, and you can say, you can do it. You can do this too. You just hang in there. If you have the desire in your heart to keep the Shabbat, then the Lord is going to make a way for you to keep the Shabbat. Encourage them. Tell them about a failure you've had if it resulted in a victory that will encourage them and allow them to feel part of the group even before they have their lives in some sort of perfect order that we feel like lines up with ours. Because if you start really scrutinizing us as individuals, maybe we're not so lined up with Torah as we think. But we might be perceived that way because of the language that we use. And we want to be careful that our mouths don't drop open if they say, I won't be here next Shabbat, I have to work. Okay? Give a lot of grace so that they can still belong and everything is not perfect. And you as the person on the pew are the most important person when it comes to things like that. Because a lot of times they won't tell elders what's going on in their lives. Find out what's going on in your lives? You don't tell me, other people tell me. That's how I find out what's happening with you most of the horrible thing is happening in my life. I find out through the second and the third person, which that goes back to being careful with what we say. So as the person on the pew, you are the one more likely than even me, apparently, to find out what's happening to people. And you can intervene there, and you can help them to feel encouraged and to feel like they belong. The next thing is attitude. And this just goes back, don't pick at each other. Just don't pick at each other. We're all on the same road, and if you're constantly picking at one another, if you have a bad attitude, if you only see the problem and you only see the glass half empty, then you're not going to be perceived as a leader by anyone else. They will not follow you. And those who are here to select leaders to join the ranks, we don't want you with us either, because we don't have the time to be discouraged. We need people who are encouraged, who have learned optimism, who have a solution when they have a problem. See, my supervisor, she used to hate, when she first started working with us, she used to cringe every time I would go in her office and say, we got reading the program statement and we have a real problem. She would just, oh no. But she found out after about a year that anytime I would go to her and say, there's a problem here, that I always had at least 2 or 3 solutions she could pick from that made sense and that would allow us to fall into line with policy and not get sued. And so now she doesn't care when I come in and plop down and say, we got a problem. She says, okay, let me have it. What is it? She doesn't care, because I have a solution as well as a problem. And that's just having a good attitude. Don't ever just present the problem. Think it through and then present 2 or 3 solutions somebody could consider and pick from. We have to also be able to balance people with the mission, or it's the issue of relationship versus the goal. And it's a tightrope balance with goal. A very great balance. And many times in her life, after I was grown and I knew how to put into words what I was thinking, I would say, now, Mom, you can choose in this issue. You've got relationship with this person, or you can be right, but you're going to have to choose. You're not going to have them both in this issue. And she did not like to hear that. She wanted the relationship and she wanted to be right. Sometimes you have to choose. Do I want to be right, or do I want to have a relationship with this person? It's very delicate in this region of the country to balance relationship with right, with relationship versus the community goal. Because let me tell you, Eastern Kentucky is not a bastion of economic industry. It's hard to find a job here. It's hard to keep a job here. It's hard to find a good paying job here. And a lot of times that means moving away. So we have a duty to care for our own with integrity. Nevertheless, we still have a long-term vision, and if all we ever deal with the immediate issues, we'll very quickly run out of funds to do anything toward a future goal, a building or anything else. So we have to balance that out. Sometimes the general says, you take that hill no matter what the cost. I don't care how many die going up that hill, you're going to get that hill. Well, this is not the military. This is not a killing field. We can't take that hill, we can't go toward that goal or that objective and leave a killing field of people behind us, wounded and dying. On the other hand, we have to effectively manage the resources that we have. We only have so much, and like I say, this is not a rich part of the state or even the country. We have a limited amount of resources, and if we've got a soldier that will not train, if this soldier will not load his weapon, if he will not clean his weapon, if he will not go to PT, if he will not learn how to march, then at some point we've got to quit wasting our resources on this soldier, send him back to boot camp or back home to mama, and train the soldiers that we have to take the hill, because the hill still has to be taken. Now, if one of those soldiers is wounded in the battle, we don't leave them bleeding and dying on the battlefield. We pick them up, patch them up, and because they've got a great attitude, they'll live to fight again another day. We have to balance those things, but you can't teach people who aren't present either physically or mentally. You can't lead people who won't walk. And there comes a point where you have to quit trying and throw your resources into those who will walk with you. And as a leader, you can only deal with those who are present. Some people do have a pastor's heart, and they do have a calling to check on people who even are not faithful. They will go and they will find. They'll leave the 99 for the one. But you've got the resources You can only spend so much. You're going to have to, as I think Rabbi Messer said it, eliminate the inferior before you can cultivate the superior. This does not mean that we take that hill at all costs. It means that we train our soldiers, and if necessary, we eliminate the independent-minded soldier who simply will not train and go. We don't waste our time. And most likely that person is the one that's going to get someone else wounded. Now, there is a cycle of relationship in the way that a group matures, and if those of you that have been with us from close to the beginning or so, you are going to be able to see these cycles in what I'm saying. Every group is a living organism. It is a body. And something that is alive first has to be born, right? We weren't just born this size and age. We had to first be born and then grow toward maturity. Groups do the same thing. So we're not saying that grown people are immature. Don't take offense at that. I'm not telling you you're immature people, but we can be an immature group of people. The way that we function together can be immature. Because even Yeshua had to grow in wisdom and stature, right? The first stage of this, and I wish we had PowerPoint, but we don't. It would make it a whole lot clearer. But in every group, you start out in what is called the form stage, F-O-R-M, and that's in capital letters. In the form stage, we figure out why we're even here. And we learn to accept one another in that forming stage. In that forming stage, we recognize that we have a need for one another, for whatever the purpose or the goal is. I'll use an example. The olive branch is a congregation because a group of people had a common need to observe the Shabbat and the festivals and to study together. That was the common need that caused them to form. Another example would be our Hebrew class. We had a group of people within the congregation who had a need to learn how to read and to write Hebrew. And so at that stage we said to one another, I need you. I need you in order to learn Hebrew. I need you in order to keep the Sabbath. So in this stage, we move from a gathering of strangers, which is what we are, a gathering of strangers, and in that stage we move together and we become attached to one another as a group. And at this stage, you as a leader are going to have to stress the relationships in the group, how these people get along with one another, helping them understand that they do need one another in order to accomplish the goal. The second stage is the storm stage, and it's exactly what it sounds like, storm, S-T-O-R-M. I mean, this is hurricane season. It's the second stage in maturity, and it's in this stage that the group will begin to adjust itself internally. There's going to be some power bids. You're going to have people who come to the forefront as leaders. There's going to be other people who felt like they should have been leaders. There's going to be power bids, power struggles, sabotage, backbiting, gossip, you name it. It's all going to be in this stage. The group wants to know what the leader's qualifications are. What qualifies you? What's your degree in? Have you ever pastored before? What makes you think you're, somebody to teach us, to lead us, to guide us? What are your moral standards? What has your life been like? Tell me your testimony. You think they just want to hear your testimony? They want to know all about you. Where are you coming from? They want to know how good you are at what you're doing. The leader is going to be challenged in this stage, and you're going to experience truly a storm of challenges. You're going to hear the group come together. At this stage, you're going to hear them start saying things like, I don't need this. And the last they said they did. But now I don't need this. I just do not need this in my life. I don't need the conflict. You've probably even heard it here. This is going nowhere. We're just spinning our wheels. What are we doing here? Nothing. That. Why can't we do it this way? It's part of the storm stage. It's a very emotional stage for a group, and let me tell you, emotions run high in this stage. But in this stage, groups will begin to form within the group. They'll start grouping up together, and that's not necessarily bad, because a lot of times we can accomplish more in like-minded groups that way. Now, this can also turn against us. At this stage, nobody is listening to one another. It is chaos, is exactly what it sounds like. But as long as, if you're in the group and you feel like you're in a group that is in this stage, just know that that's where you are and don't get too upset about it. You can kind of stand back and look at the storm and say, they're storming. They're fighting. They're challenge the leader. They don't think they're going anywhere, but they're going to have to grow out of this. But I know what's happening, so I'm not upset. A good leader in this stage will anticipate the problems and will have the answers even before they are asked. The leader at this point is going to seem very bossy, very authoritative, and they are going to be all over you. That's their job as a leader in this stage. The leader will be more authoritarian at this point, and that again is going to ask questions. Why do we have to do it this way? Who do you think you are? Rebellion stage. And like Moses, he's going to have to lay down the law or the Torah, whichever it may be. He's going to have to seem like he's everywhere at once and he's all over everyone. Very active. The leader has to be hyper at this stage. The good news is you don't have to remain at this level or you would die trying to keep up with everyone in this stage of development. But just as the storms are raging among the group, the leader has to storm the group and really be active. He has to focus more on the relationships in the group instead of the task. You know, we have a question, what did we come here to do? At the storm stage, you don't even remember why you're here because you're sitting there saying, I don't need this. Emotional, and you don't know why you're here, so what's the good of a task when you're just going to say, don't focus too much on a task. And bringing those relationships to maturity. Conflict is the characteristic of the storm stage. And each of these stages, by the way, can last from 1 to just not trying to discourage you. I would like to think that the storm stage, we're at least at the back end of it. Especially this Sukkot has caused me to believe that we might have. But proceed to the next stage of maturity until those conflicts within the groups are resolved. Until those things stabilize, you cannot mature one step further. And so that's the job of the leader, to try to bring those relationships to deal with emotions so that the group will stabilize and come up one level where that we can actually accomplish a task instead of fight. The greatest prevention to moving on to the next stage is going to be a strong competitive member, somebody that's trying to run everything, whether he's a formal leader or not, or a clique. We talked about groups. Those can be good because they can be work groups. They can get more done as a group. On the other hand, if a clique forms that starts trying to vie for power, then you've got another church split. So it's up to the leader at this point, and they're going to be seen as the bad guy. You just have to get over it, suck it up, and go on. If you're the leader, you're going to be seen as the bad guy or the Jezebel. It just depends. But it's up to the leader at this stage of maturity to either eliminate the person or the group that is causing this sort of challenge at this stage. Norm stage, we've come through this. Everybody's stabilized. We've got our working groups. We've kind of accepted that, okay, maybe I do need this group after all. The power struggles are worked out, and the groups begin to work more independently of the leader. The environment becomes more creative, and it's less confrontational. You'll see more action and less conflict. It will become, the group struggle together will become less political, and they will begin to cooperate. You might have one group working in the kitchen. You might have one group working to put the services together. you're going to have all these groups cooperating with one another instead of struggling, into a power struggle with one another. The members in this stage will begin to clarify what they think their role is. A lot of people, they still sit on the pew and they're not really sure why they're there, but they come every Shabbat. But I really don't know where I fit in. I don't know what group I'm in. You need to belong somewhere. You need to feel a purpose for being there. And once again, we'll move back toward that feeling that I personally do need to be part of this group, regardless of what I said in the storm stage, that I don't need these people and I don't need their arguments and I don't need their bad remarks and I don't need their criticism and their judgment. Now you say, well, okay, I can live with it because I do feel the need to be with this group. You find your individual identity and you find your gift in the norm stage. That's NORM. It's where you start acting normal again. At this point, instead of the leader pushing out the inferior, the rebel, the person causing the chaos or the conflict, instead of the leader having to recognize this person, identify them, and push them out, it is the group itself that will push them out. I saw a demonstration of that this week. There was really no elder here to challenge the person. And instead, the average person on the pew took care of them. They'd been through that before, and they knew how to deal with it. It's the independent-minded people they're kind of going to be naked. They'll be exposed to the groups, and the group will understand that this little group within us, or this person within us, is just simply not going to adapt to our vision. Or we call them olive branchers. But they simply cannot adapt themselves to where we're going. Therefore, as a group, we start to exert social pressure and we begin to push them out. And the leader's just kind of standing there going, good job, good job. The group doesn't realize it at this point, but the leader's let up on the gas. And I did this as a teacher. The first 6 weeks, I was the meanest human being that ever taught English on the face of the earth. Loved to terrify them for 6 weeks or so. And after that, I could let up on the gas and coast the rest of the year because they just thought I was me. At that point, that's when you can start to have real conversations with them. You can joke with them a little bit without it becoming out of hand. You can really let up and have a relationship with the class instead of being Attila the Hun. But if you're not Attila the Hun first, you're never going to go back there and get it again. It's lost to you. But the leader lets up on the gas at this stage, and even though he's actively monitoring the relationships within the group, now he can begin to assign tasks and feel like those tasks will be accomplished, that the groups have the ability to perform their tasks independently. And the final stage is perform. The perform stage, I think in the military they call this esprit de corps. And a lot of times you see this at the end of boot camp because they're under a pressure cooker and they mature much quickly. It's life or death a lot of times where they feel that way. But you have a group maturity. Internal struggles have been resolved. The independent-minded recruits at this stage have either been sent home to mama or sent to a remedial camp. But the remaining members of the group have become interdependent, and they've moved from the I need to be in the group to we need each other. And you saw that, I think, even on Brother Houtz's graph. You move from I need to be here to we need one another. It is a controlled, stable environment that everybody can enjoy being in. We perform well, and we're secure enough in our roles or in our little subgroups that we don't have to sabotage one another and we don't have to snipe at one another and get little digs in. We don't have to do that anymore because we're fine. Self-disciplined and really cruise control. The leader can step back and it pretty much runs itself because everybody has come to a stage of maturity. The groups know how to take a task, they know how to organize, they know how to plan and then perform it. And at that point, that's when you really get things done. As we've talked about community, we say, well, we're really no closer than we were when we first started talking about it, other than maybe have a little more money in the bank account. But we really are closer to it because as a group, we are maturing to a stage where we could even begin to handle something like that. I don't think we're there yet, but we're maturing that way. Now, this all sounds fairly simple. Okay, there's 4 stages of group maturity. Maybe we can figure out where we are. We know how far we have to go. But it's not that simple. Because for every 10 people in a group, there are 90 relationships. For every 10 people in a group, there are 90 relationships. Let's say we have a core group of 30 people here. That means there are 270 separate relationships going on at any given time. That can be chaos. And if those 270 relationships get stuck in a storm stage, you've got hurricanes, you've got tsunamis, you've got tornadoes, you've got floods, you've got wildfires, you've got a worldwide catastrophic weather event. So the important thing is to develop out of that storm stage with our 270 relationships and move toward the norm stage where we can stabilize. What the leader has to be able to do, and what you have to be able to do, even if you don't have the positional authority, it's only a personal influence that you have, you must recognize the stage of group maturity that we are in, and you must behave accordingly. It's like I say, if you know what's going on in the storm stage, then don't get in there and fight with them. You know what's happening. No need to overreact. No need to get drawn into it. Just keep reminding them. Work on the relationships, be a peacemaker, mostly keep your mouth shut, and let it work through. Moses could not stop that stage, let me tell you. He might have been Moses, but he couldn't stop it. All he could do was deal with the relationships and the problems as they came up. And if we were to start with the Exodus from Egypt, we would see this complete progression and how at certain points it would look like they had normalized and all of a sudden something happened. And they reset to 0 immaturity. 0. They had to start all over again. Certain things will make that happen. Here's some of the things that will cause a group to reset to 0 maturity. Introduce new members. If the groups are set, if the groups are formed, everybody knows what they're doing, you want to reset them to 0 maturity, introduce new members. Because they have a degree of maturity, and now you're introducing fresh ideas and fresh thoughts, and the power struggles have to occur all over again. People have to challenge and find and refit back together. If you have an older person who's never been married, and then they get married in, say 40s, 50s, when they're already set in their ways, they're going to have to go through these stages of adjusting to a new partner the same way a group does, because they're already normalized. They're going to have to reset to 0 maturity. They're going to have to go through a storm stage like everyone else. It probably wouldn't hurt if older people are getting married for the first time for them to have separate bedrooms just in case they want to survive the storm stage without a divorce, because it's difficult. Another thing is a change in the leadership. If the leadership changes, you will reset. Because the group cannot handle that psychologically. Something will happen. If there is a vacuum in the leadership, the maturity changes. If our task or our vision changes, we will reset to 0 maturity. If we stood up on Shabbat and said, forget that community thing, we're going to figure something else out to do, you would reset. And you would say, these people don't know what they're doing. And there would be confusion and chaos, and we would storm and so forth until another goal was identified. If the environment changes, if we crashed on a desert island, I wouldn't be a leader. It would be somebody that had survival skills and knew how to survive on a desert island that would become the leader. That will shake up the group, it will reform and begin resetting toward maturity. If the leader, and this is important, if the leader displays a sudden change in behavior, if you have a leader or leaders in the group, and all of a sudden they start acting differently, not a bad week, but a bad month or 3 months, then the group becomes confused and they reset to zero maturity and they have to begin all over again from square one. So if a normally outgoing leader all of a sudden just withdraws, isn't seen, isn't heard from, doesn't have much to say about anything, the group's lost and they'll reset. On the other hand, if you've got a normally reserved leader and all of a sudden they're up in everybody's business, they'll reset. So leaders, if you're going to be consistent, even as a bell sheep, you can't be different next week than you were this week. If you're normally enthusiastic and you've got a bad quarter, people will notice and you might cause group reset to immaturity. You have to be able to recognize that. Now there's some monitoring tips I can give you if you are a leader or even as a lay leader, the person on the pew that's helping out with personal influence. You can identify where your group is by just identifying how you feel about certain things a lot of times. It will give you a clue as to what an individual might be doing that's pressing your buttons, and the way you feel about it will help you identify where the person is or where the group is. If you feel annoyed, if there are people who annoy you over and over, the person is simply seeking your attention. It's probably not willful misbehavior or an open challenge like you would expect in the storm stage. But it is probably part of the storm stage because they're not secure yet. If they're constantly seeking your attention, and it's bad when you've got adults acting like children who constantly want reinforcement for what they're doing. Come look at this. Is this okay? Is this all right? Did I do this right? They just pester the daylights out of you wanting reinforcement. And you're not angry with them, but you're thinking, good grief, get off the phone and just go do it. Don't ask me how to do it, just do it. If you feel annoyed, that's just attention-seeking behavior. They're not doing it on purpose to bug you. They need to feel that reinforcement. And now you can do some things. You can say, okay, I'll look at it when you get done. Bring it to me when you get done. And we'll look at it then. And then you cannot fail to recognize the achievement at that point. You can't fail to look at it, or the attention that they needed, you've not given it to him. You have to recognize the accomplishment. Because even Moshe, he kept a very careful record of everything that the people brought into the tabernacle. He noticed their accomplishments and he recorded it for us to look at. And this generation later, we can look at what every tribe and what every family contributed as far as goods, as far as precious jewels or gold or whatever, craftsmanship. He recorded the accomplishments. And that's what you as a leader have to do. You have to take notice of people's accomplishments. It doesn't mean you can be there every day when they do something right, but you do have to recognize it. Encourage those gifts. Now, if you feel angry, that's a danger signal, because if someone is probably making a real threat to you, you don't just wake up and feel angry. There's a difference between annoyed and angry. If you feel angry, probably there's a power struggle. And you need to identify what that power struggle is. The person may have issued you an ultimatum. They may have said it's this way or no way. The person may refuse to do what you ask him. Just said, no, I'm not going to do it. Forget you. He might have done something that you expressly asked him not to do. These are all power plays. They're in the storm stage and they're bidding for power. Now there's a couple of ways you can deal with a power player, but you're not going to feel. Hopefully, it's expected in the storm stage. Don't be upset when people challenge you or your power or your authority. Don't be upset. It's expected in the storm stage. It will happen. It's hard not to be upset, but the group is adjusting to. They're trying to figure out where they are. And this has to do with your kids too. Trust me. If you're in, this will work on your children. The best way is to determine determine ahead of time what this person's acceptable choices are. Well, I can accept it if this person does this. I can accept it if they do this or this. Nevertheless, because this person has a need for some feeling a little helpless, you are going to give them choices. You can sit them down, work with them personally, and I don't have time tonight to really go into what was happening with Yeshua. And actually have a bell curve of radicals, traditionals, move some of the resistance to the plan. But you sit down and you give the person a choice. You know, we're having a struggle here, we're having a conflict here. These are the choices I can give you. You can do this. You can do this. Or you can do this. You choose. You let them participate in the decision. Now, truth known, they really didn't make the decision. You already decided beforehand what was acceptable to you. On the other hand, they are participating in the decision-making process, and if that's really all they need at that time is to feel like they've got a little bit of power, then you've given them the power to do that. These are choices you've already chosen. You set up the playing field, but you let them choose how they were going to run that play. You already know who's going to win. Choice 3 always has to be, you can take the door. You have to give them a way out, because they're not always going to choose what is acceptable to you. And when that happens, when you let them choose the door, you're always going to feel guilty about it, because you're going to feel like everybody should have been included. If I were a good leader, this person wouldn't have left. This person wouldn't have quit the group. You got to be able to live with what's behind door number 3 if you're a leader. And if you can't deal with it, don't be a leader. Because the day will come when someone will challenge your authority, and you will have to offer them what's behind door number 3 as well. I'm telling you, you'll feel guilty. You just have to be able to deal with it. If you feel hurt, what's happened is somebody has just probably taken revenge for a lost power struggle. If they're saying things to you or doing things that hurt you, you don't feel annoyed, you don't feel angry, you just feel hurt. Children do this to us. They will say things before they really have language. Someone was telling me, a little boy said, "I hate you," to his daddy. Well, at his age, he doesn't know what hate is. He just knows his daddy makes him feel bad. That's what he's expressing. When people lose a power struggle, they will try to get revenge. And they may not get it just at that second that they lose the struggle. They might wait a few months, but they will eventually get you back. That's an endless cycle, and you've got to know how to stop it as a leader, because everybody seems to want the last shot, right? You're going to even see a lot of passive-aggressive behavior, and you may never see it coming when they get you back. They might seem to have just backed off a little bit, but they will get you back. Even with kids, you might think you won the power struggle, but let me tell you what, they're plotting, they're planning, and when the time is right, they will take revenge. A lot of times this comes through planting bad news about you within the organization, within the group. Sometimes, they are more upfront like little children. They'll just say, "I hate you," and get it over with, which I think that's probably better. Or, "You're selfish." I've heard kids say that to their parents. "You're selfish." But those words sting. The only way you can stop that is to stop, talk to the person, get to the bottom of the emotions that they're dealing with, because remember, they're in the storm stage. They're emotional. You've got to talk about those emotions. It doesn't mean you agree with what they're saying, but if you don't deal with the emotions, it won't get better. The relationship will not improve. You can't downplay their comments. You can't say, "Oh, you're not being a big boy when you act like that." You have to acknowledge the emotion that the child is feeling. Deal with it. I'll give you an example. Let's say that we're having Hebrew class. And let's say June and Ella are yakety, 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 yakety out through Hebrew class. And I'm trying to teach a new dialogue. I'm trying to teach a new pattern. But I'm having trouble concentrating because I can hear this little conversation over to the side. And so I ask Ella, "Shake it." Well, she might be quiet for just that second. But later, as I hear her walking out the door, I might hear her telling June, "Jesus never liked me." This goes way back. She's always making me be quiet, even when I hear other people in the class talking. She's focusing on me and picking me out because she just wants me to quit the class. She doesn't even want me in Hebrew class, so she's trying to make me quit. You know, the only reason she's even having that class so she can run something else in that congregation. She didn't come to me, but she's getting me back. She just wants to control everything we do. I'm sick of this. We're in the storm stage. We're having a problem. Now, if this really happened, and it didn't, I told Ella beforehand, because I knew she's a good sport, I would feel hurt. If I heard those things coming back to me, I would feel really hurt, because my point was not to hurt Ella. My point was to make myself heard in Hebrew class, and so the other students could hear me. I was just trying to be understood, and all of a sudden I'm Jezebel with a dry erase marker. So the only way I can deal with this is to talk to Ella and say, "Why do you feel this way?" Well, I know, I understand, and I've got to explain to her why I had to ask her to be quiet. And then she's got to explain to me why she feels like I single her out. Maybe I am hearing her over other people. I don't know. What is at the bottom of these hurtful words? Stop the cycle of revenge. And the last thing is for people that make you feel hopeless. And we talked about this in the encouragement class. The person that makes you feel hopeless in a conflict is the person that's given up on himself. And they want you to give up on them too, so you'll just quit hassling them and they can go their way and, be happy.